You know that feeling when you have a massive, just incredibly important project looming over you?
Oh, yeah. The absolute worst feeling.
Right. Like it could be a career change, a really complex creative endeavor, or, even just finally organizing your business taxes.
Right. The stuff you really don't want to look at.
Exactly. So you block out the time, you sit down at your desk, you stare at the screen, and then suddenly you are like deep cleaning the baseboards in your hallway.
Naturally, as one does.
Yeah, and you emerge an hour later with spotless trim and just this um, profound sense of failure, like assuming you are just fundamentally flawed or lacking basic discipline.
Which is so common. I mean, we all do that.
We do. But if you are listening to this right now, actively putting off something important, there's actually a literal neurological cycle happening inside your head that is actively preventing you from pursuing your goals.
Yeah.
It has absolutely nothing to do with laziness.
Yeah, the whole concept of laziness is, well, it's fundamentally a misdiagnosis of what is actually happening under the hood. Your brain is essentially hijacking your success. It's working overtime to protect you from something it perceives as like an immediate threat.
Wow.
And when you look closely at the neurological and psychological machinery driving this behavior, the moral failing we attach to procrastination completely dissolves.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today we are looking at this really extensive collection of notes from Olga, who's a cognitive science and computation researcher at the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, her synthesis is fantastic.
It really is, and it relies heavily on the work of Kim Peikel, who has spent decades leading the research on the psychology of procrastination.
Decades? He's kind of the guy for this.
Literally. So our mission for this deep dive is to isolate exactly why your brain sabotages your to-do list, and then outline the specific biological interventions you can use to, rewire that response.
Right, and the foundational shift in Peikel's work requires us to completely discard our usual approach to this problem.
Like the whole time management thing.
Exactly. I mean, for decades, the cultural consensus has been that procrastination is a time management issue. So the presumed fix is always structural, right? Like you buy a new planner, or you block your calendar into these strict 15-minute increments, or download an app.
Which never works.
Right, because Peikel's research proves that procrastination is not a time management problem. It is an emotion regulation problem.
This is huge. An emotion regulation problem changes the entire paradigm.
Completely.
I mean, we aren't avoiding the spreadsheet or the essay because we lack the time to do it. We're avoiding the task purely because of the emotional state it triggers.
Right, so let's trace the actual biological cycle here. You sit down to draft a difficult business proposal.
Okay.
Just the mere thought of initiating that task generates a complex negative emotion.
Like dread.
Dread, exactly.
Yeah.
Depending on the person, it manifests as profound overwhelm, anxiety, self-doubt, or, the fear that the final product just won't meet expectations.
Right.
And your brain is evolutionarily wired to despise negative emotions. It will act aggressively to neutralize them.
It wants to feel safe.
Yes. So it triggers an escape hatch. It literally compels you to step away from the proposal and engage in anything else. You reorganize your desk, you check your email, you start cleaning.
And then you feel better?
Exactly. The moment you pivot away from the difficult task, the negative feeling of dread just evaporates. It's replaced instantly by relief.
Wait, but isn't relief a good thing? Like, why is the brain punishing us for seeking a positive feeling?
Oh.
I mean, if you think about it, it's like training a dog by handing it a piece of steak every time it barks aggressively at the mailman.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, because you get the immediate relief of a quiet dog while the mailman is walking away, but you are rewarding the exact wrong reaction. You're reinforcing the barking.
Exactly.
So by seeking out the positive feeling of relief in the short term, we are actively punishing our future selves.
What's fascinating here is how the brain fundamentally misinterprets the modern environment.
How so?
Well, you are the dog, and you are handing yourself the steak. In psychology, behaviors that get rewarded get repeated. Always.
Right.
The immediate relief you feel acts as this powerful neurological reward. The brain learns a very simple algorithmic lesson.
Which is?
When faced with a difficult, overwhelming stimulus, executing an avoidance behavior yields a hit of positive emotion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it creates a reinforced avoidance loop. Task triggers negative emotion, you avoid the task, you feel relief. The brain's threat detection system is operating like an overzealous antivirus software.
Flagging everything.
Right. It miscategorizes a blank Google Doc as a system-critical threat and forces a hard reset to protect the CPU.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because that threat detection system isn't just a metaphor, right? It's a physical piece of hardware in your head.
Very much so.
We are talking about a literal neural battlefield between two specific systems in the brain competing for control.
Yes, the amygdala and the DACC.
Right, so on one side, we have the amygdala, the brain's ancient alarm system. I mean, its primary function is to scan the environment for threats and keep you alive.
Which was great when we were running from tigers.
Exactly. But now, when a task feels overwhelmingly stressful, the amygdala flags it as a present danger and screams at you to disengage.
And attempting to override that alarm is the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex.
The DACC.
Right. This region is responsible for cognitive control and conflict monitoring. It's essentially the discipline manager of the brain.
The adult in the room.
Yes. Its job is to receive that blaring fear signal from the amygdala, rationally evaluate it, inhibit the panic response, and force you to take goal-directed action.
Okay, so I picture the amygdala and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex as like two roommates fighting over the steering wheel of a car on the highway.
I love that visual.
Right. The amygdala is in the passenger seat, absolutely panicking, violently grabbing the wheel to swerve the car off the road into a ditch because it thinks the shadow ahead is a cliff.
Meanwhile, the driver's just trying to stay on the road.
Exactly. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex is in the driver's seat, physically wrestling the wheel back to center, just trying to maintain course and speed.
That is precisely the dynamic. And when you procrastinate, the panicked passenger overpowers the driver. The amygdala wins.
Like yanks the wheel.
Yeah. In cognitive science, we call this an amygdala hijack. The emotional centers of the brain completely override the rational executive function. You flee from the task.
Wow.
But the physiological reality of this avoidance loop is what really requires our attention. Because what you repeat, you become.
What do you mean by that?
Every time you allow the amygdala to win and you consume that hit of relief, you myelinate, you physically strengthen the neural pathway for procrastination.
So we are actually structurally altering our brains.
Exactly.
It stops being a mere behavioral quirk and becomes a physiological default. The pathway for avoidance becomes highly efficient, while the discipline circuit, the DACC, just kind of atrophies from disuse, much like a muscle.
The neural connections for avoidance become faster and thicker. This is why putting off a project on Monday makes it exponentially harder to start on Thursday.
Oh, because you've been practicing avoiding it.
Right. You have spent 3 days actively reinforcing the procrastination circuits.
Okay, but if the biological imperative is solely to avoid the negative feeling of the task, I have to wonder why the brain bothers with all the theater.
Theater.
Yeah, like if the amygdala just wants us to run away, why don't we just lie down on the floor and stare at the ceiling?
That's a great point.
We rarely do that.
Yeah.
We almost always end up executing other, seemingly random tasks.
Well, because lying on the floor introduces a secondary problem. Guilt.
The guilt.
Yeah. If you actively do nothing while a major deadline looms, you trigger intense guilt, which is another severe negative emotion.
And the amygdala hates that too.
Right. The amygdala is entirely agnostic about which negative emotion it is avoiding. It just wants them all gone. Sitting still triggers the very alarm the brain is trying to silence.
So it has to find a workaround.
Exactly. To escape the guilt, the brain employs an incredibly sophisticated disguise. It masks avoidance as productivity.
That is so sneaky. The brain tricks us into feeling productive so we don't realize we're actively fleeing.
It really does. And Peichel's research highlights 2 distinct disguises here. The first is perfectionism.
Which people usually brag about.
Right. Culturally, we view perfectionists as high achievers with uncompromising standards. But clinically, perfectionism functions as a profound fear response.
The fear of being judged.
Exactly. The fear that the result will be judged, flawed, or rejected essentially paralyzes the executive function.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot fail if you never declare the work finished.
The source notes actually detail a fascinating study on this involving university professors.
Oh, the publication rate study.
Yeah. Researchers evaluated the publication rates of academics and found a strong inverse correlation with perfectionism.
Which seems counterintuitive.
Right. The professors who scored higher on perfectionism actually published fewer papers than their less perfectionist colleagues. And this was regardless of their work ethic or intelligence.
Because academic publishing is the ultimate exercise in peer review and potential rejection.
It's terrifying.
Yeah. For a highly perfectionist professor, the manuscript sitting safely on their hard drive poses absolutely no emotional threat.
Right.
But the moment they submit it, they are exposed to the negative emotion of judgment. So they endlessly revise. The need to be flawless actively suppresses their actual output.
Which brings us to the second disguise, which Peichel refers to as short-term mood repair, or, productive procrastination.
That's the one that catches everyone.
Oh, I am heavily guilty of this. It's when you swap the high-stakes, anxiety-inducing task for a low-stakes, safe task that still delivers a dopamine hit of accomplishment.
Give me an example.
Okay, so instead of drafting the actual essay, I will spend an hour meticulously color-coding my research notes.
Clap.
Or, instead of applying to jobs, I'll tweak the margins and font choices on my resume for the 5th time.
Right.
The notes even mentioned reading 10 different books on how to start a business instead of just filing the LLC paperwork. It really begs the question, is all preparation just procrastination in disguise?
It's a fine line.
Where is the line between valid readiness and avoidance?
Well, the demarcation line is the presence of risk.
Risk, okay.
Yeah. Safe tasks like color coding notes or adjusting resume margins, they entirely remove the risk of failure. No one is evaluating the aesthetics of your highlighting system.
That's so true.
You feel a sense of motion, but you are completely stationary regarding the objective. You are generating a false sense of productivity to appease the amygdala's demand for safety.
But the needle hasn't moved.
Exactly. The needle on the actual intimidating task remains unmoved.
Man. So we manufacture busy work to insulate ourselves from fear. But that assumes the fear is justified, right? We're operating on the premise that the brain's prediction of dread is fundamentally accurate. But how do we know the task isn't actually as miserable as our brain insists it will be?
Well, we actually have empirical data on exactly how poor our emotional forecasting is.
Oh, we do?
Yes. Thanks to Tim Peichel's famous pager study.
Ah, yes. The pager study.
Right. Before smartphones were ubiquitous, Peichel distributed physical pagers to 45 university students for the 5 days leading up to a major academic deadline.
5 days of pagers.
Yep. He paged them 8 times a day. And at each prompt, the students had to immediately log what they were doing and what their emotional state was regarding the impending assignment.
I just think the methodology here is brilliant.
Right.
Because it strips away retrospective bias, It captures the exact cognitive dissonance in the moment.
Exactly.
They were forced to document their avoidance in real time.
And the behavior was entirely predictable. The students consistently replaced the difficult academic work with more exciting, low-stakes activities.
Shocker.
Right. But the critical data point was the narrative they constructed to justify the avoidance. Early in the week, they reported sentiments like, I work better under pressure, or I am just not in the right headspace. I'll feel more inspired tomorrow.
Oh, the classic lies we tell ourselves.
Yeah, they use these rationalizations to alleviate the immediate guilt.
They relied on the assumption that their future self would magically possess the willpower and desire that their current self lacked.
Exactly. But then the deadline arrived, they were out of time, and were forced to finally sit down and execute the work.
The moment of truth.
Yes. Peichel surveyed them after the assignments were submitted, and out of the 45 students, not a single one was glad they waited.
0%.
0%. They universally reported wishing they had started earlier. But more importantly, they collectively realized that the actual friction of doing the task was significantly lower than the immense dread they had built up in their heads during the avoidance phase.
That is just wild.
Yeah.
Why is the human brain so terrible at predicting its own future emotions?
It's a great question.
Like, you aren't actually avoiding the task. You are avoiding how you think the task is going to make you feel. And your brain is wrong almost all the time.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the brain is an evolutionary prediction machine dramatically calibrated toward worst-case scenarios.
Because that kept us alive.
Exactly. Over-indexing on potential threats kept our ancestors alive. So when you visualize sitting down to write the paper, your brain does not simulate the quiet focus or the satisfaction of completing a thought.
No, it simulates torture.
Right. It simulates the absolute maximum potential for frustration, the pain of a blank page, the fear of a failing grade. It catastrophizes the friction.
Wow.
The pager study proves that the dread of starting is almost always infinitely worse than the reality of doing.
Because doing is just typing.
Right. The actual work is often mundane, perhaps tedious, but it rarely matches the emotional torture chamber the amygdala anticipates.
Okay, so we have mapped the architecture of this problem. We understand the biological avoidance loop, the strengthening of neural pathways, the disguises of perfectionism and productive procrastination, and the brain's severely flawed effective forecasting.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. So how do we dismantle this? What is the structural intervention?
Well, the answer, after 20 years of psychological and neuroscientific research, is embarrassingly simple.
Embarrassingly simple.
You just start.
Wait, really? Just start?
You just start. You commit to 5 to 10 minutes of the task, entirely divorcing yourself from the expectation of the outcome.
Okay, I mean, on the surface, just start sounds like a motivational poster, not a neuroscientific hack.
It sounds totally reductive, I know, but the goal of the 5 minutes is not to make meaningful progress on the project.
Then what is it?
The sole objective is to interrupt the biological avoidance loop. There is a precise 2-step execution for this intervention.
Okay, let's hear it.
Step 1 is to catch it and name it. When you feel the overwhelming urge to abandon the spreadsheet and go reorganize your spice rack, pause.
Easier said than done, but okay.
Right, but just pause. Acknowledge the physical urge to flee and articulate the exact emotion out loud or in your head. Formulate the sentence like, I am feeling overwhelmed by this data, or I am feeling anxious that my manager will reject this proposal.
So what does this all mean neurologically? Like, why does articulating the emotion alter the brain state?
Well, when you force yourself to translate a vague, visceral feeling into precise language, you activate the prefrontal cortex, specifically the areas involved in linguistic processing.
Okay.
This region sends inhibitory signals down to the amygdala, physically dampening the panic response.
Oh, it's like being a little kid alone in a dark room, terrified that there was a monster in the corner.
Exactly.
Your amygdala is firing wildly. But naming the emotion is the equivalent of walking over and turning on the lights.
I love that analogy.
The emotional center disengages, the rational brain processes the visual data, and you realize the monster is just, a pile of laundry draped over a chair.
That is exactly what happens. The mechanism is called affect labeling. By verbalizing the emotion, you are literally forcing your brain to shift processing power away from the limbic system and back into the rational dorsal anterior cingulate cortex.
You're handing the steering wheel back to the driver.
Exactly.
So step 1 is turning on the lights through affect labeling. What is step 2?
Step 2 is to make the task stupidly small.
Stupidly small.
Yes. The amygdala is reacting to the perceived magnitude of the threat. To bypass the alarm system, you must shrink the threat profile.
How small are we talking?
Well, if your internalized goal is, I need to write a 10-page essay tonight, the sheer scale of that demand will trigger an amygdala hijack. You must change the parameters of the goal so it registers as a non-threat.
It is a self-mission past your own security system.
Exactly. You strip away the outcome. Your goal is not to write the essay. Your goal is strictly to open the Google Doc and type any words for exactly 10 minutes.
Wow.
If you're dreading an hour-long workout, you do not focus on the hour. Your sole objective is to put on your athletic shoes and walk out the front door.
So you aren't actually lowering your standards long term?
No, not at all. This is not about permanently lowering your standards. It is a calculated manipulation of your neurobiology.
Right.
Because once you cross that 10-minute threshold, the anticipated dread dissolves, the avoidance loop is fractured, and the brain's natural momentum takes over.
Because the friction of continuing is vastly lower than the friction of starting.
Yes.
It completely removed the moral weight and the shame from the equation. It frames procrastination not as a character defect, but as a predictable biological hurdle that we now have the exact mechanistic tools to clear.
And it allows you to systematically rewire the brain, slowly strengthening the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex 1 microstart at a time.
Incredible. So next time you catch yourself generating an incredibly complex color coding system, or deciding that Tuesday afternoon is the optimal time to clean your refrigerator,
Which it never is.
never. Pause and take a breath. Recognize that it is not a lack of willpower. It is simply your amygdala attempting to protect you from an exaggerated threat. Turn on the lights, name the emotion driving the avoidance, and assign yourself a stupidly small 10-minute task.
That's the secret.
It really is. But before we finish, there's a broader implication here worth mulling over. We have focused on how our brain's threat detection system is miscalibrated regarding spreadsheets, essays, and chores.
Right.
But if our amygdala is routinely hallucinating this level of dread over mundane tasks, what other critical areas of our lives is it blindly categorizing as threats?
That's a deep question.
Are we avoiding difficult conversations with our partners? Are we putting off major life changes, career pivots, or setting necessary boundaries merely because they trigger temporary emotional discomfort? We really have to ask ourselves, are we productive procrastinating on our actual lives? Thank you so much for taking this deep dive into the source material with us. The next time you face the messy landscape of your own avoidance, remember the biology, drop the self-judgment, and just turn on the lights.